Thank you. It's an honor to be here among so many important leaders in the fight for freedom and scientific integrity. I'm used to arguing before courts. I'm an attorney, and when one argues before an appellate court, the judges are allowed to interrupt at any time with a question. They don't even have to raise their hand. They just interrupt and ask you a question. So I encourage all of you, as throughout my speech, to go ahead and just interject something, ask a question about a topic. That's fine, I'm used to it. Uh-oh, I don't have a little microphone. Does that mean I'm not getting picked up by the tape recorder? Oh, okay. Please go to the floor and ask the microphone, but I can repeat it. If it's something quick, I can repeat the question. The most recent case I argued was before the New Jersey Supreme Court. This was a couple of weeks ago, and it concerned the issue of whether the people have the right to recall a U.S. senator. This has never been done in the history of our country. But under the New Jersey Constitution, under the laws of several states, the people can initiate a petition to recall and remove from office their U.S. senator. And this is being attempted in New Jersey, and it's being opposed by a sitting U.S. senator, and has now gone before the New Jersey Supreme Court. I know you haven't seen any publicity about this. You will hear a lot of publicity as soon as they issue a decision, which will be any day, about whether the people have a right to recall a U.S. senator. And that could have a dramatic impact on the balance of power between our representatives and our people. And of course, on the global warming issue, the people are now on our side. Polls show that maybe only 35%, maybe less, of the public now believe in the myth of global warming. And it's become a campaign issue. And I think that's why in many of the view graphs yesterday, the developments about how the tide is turning in our favor on this global warming issue are the reason those view graphs have such recent dates is because politicians on our side are starting to use the issue in their campaign ads. Particularly Carly Fiorina in California was running television ads criticizing Barbara Boxer for her support of the global warming myth. And Carly, as you may have read, won by a landslide in her primary and is now in a position where she may beat the entrenched Democratic Barbara Boxer, and she may do it using this issue. And of course, politicians, all they really care about are elections and preserving their power. So once a candidate shows that there's an effective issue for defeating an incumbent, all the other politicians see that, and they start running for cover, and that's what we're watching. Lindsey Graham is running for cover now. John McCain ran for cover a while ago when he saw this happening. Some of the Democrats are running for cover. A little bit about myself. I graduated from college with an engineering degree, electrical engineering and computer science. Took a lot of courses in physics as well. I worked for a number of years in the engineering industry. I worked in Silicon Valley for a few years for Intel. I spent some time working at Bell Labs, and I appreciated some of the presentations yesterday on the engineering topics. I'm not sure I agree that corporations are all that helpful to our cause, having worked for engineering corporations. The problem, frankly, is that corporations over time seem to be increasingly run by liberals. And while certainly I'm a big supporter of capitalism and it's far better than the alternative, I think we also need to be realistic that it's liberals who acquire these positions of power in these corporations, who acquire power over the marketing department, over the public relations department, over the advertising dollars. And in a decision earlier this year, Citizens United, the Supreme Court told corporations that you can now spend money directly in elections advocating a particular issue or advocating for a particular candidate. So corporations now have the power to spend money directly in elections, as individuals do. We can all do it too. There are no limits on how much money an individual can spend in an election, in an independent expenditure, in support of a candidate or in support of an issue. Individuals have always had this right. Now corporations have this right. But look at how few corporations are doing that. Why aren't we seeing these big corporations running ads against cap and trade? I submit the reason is because these corporations, by and large, are run by liberals. And they don't view the cap and trade issue as affecting their personal salary, and they don't want to run issues against their favorite, or they don't want to run ads against their liberal candidates. Okay, most of the people running these corporations, they like Barbara Boxer. They voted for Barack Obama. They like Harry Reid. These are the people who are in power in these corporations, and I think it's our job to speak out and hold these corporations accountable for not defending the shareholder interests and the interests of the consumers as they should be doing, and instead allowing their own personal political views to obscure their activity in elections. You want me to?
Yeah, this one's not working so well.
It's not working so well? Okay. We'll use this. Not quite as loud, but can you hear me okay? Okay, very good. A bit more about my personal background. After I was an engineer for a while, then I went to law school after I saved up enough money and wanted a little bit of a change in direction. And when I got to law school, I worked hard and I made it on the law review, which is a select group of people. I got on the hard way, which was through merit. There are also some set-aside quotas for minorities to get on the law review, and it's a hard quota. I'm not talking about affirmative action. I'm talking about a hard quota where a certain number of different categories are put on the law review automatically, virtually independent of whether that number qualified. And while I was on law review, I got to know a fellow by the name of Barack Obama. And he was friendly enough. I mean, he's a personable individual, but he had two characteristics that I found striking then. One was he didn't work very hard. I'd even say he's lazy. And the other is he is self-centered. And those, other than that, he's a nice guy and cordial, but he has those two characteristics. And this is no secret. After he was elected president, the New York Daily News called me up to ask me for my impressions of him, and I gave words to that effect, and I don't think the reporter liked it, but she did print my experiences, and I was the only one who said that. All the other individuals they interviewed gave glowing praise, as his professors have all given him glowing praise. Some of the praise is so over the top, it's just unbelievable. In one case, Professor Lawrence Tribe gave credit to Barack Obama for helping him on a law review article that applied the theory of relativity to the determination of legal issues. And the law review article is entitled something like the curvature of space and how this can inform our interpretation of certain legal issues such as abortion. And he cites Barack Obama for helping him write this article. Well, Barack Obama, of course, has no background in science whatsoever. And he doesn't work hard. He's not a hard worker. And you can see that to this day, where you would think after a year and a half in office, and after serving as a senator before that, and after serving in the Illinois State Senate before that, you would think that maybe he could give a press conference in a public school without requiring the assistance of two huge teleprompters on each side of him. I mean, at this stage in his career, you would think maybe he could speak without reading off of a screen. Well, he can't. And that's what we're dealing with. We do have term limits, of course, and there is a question as to how much power he really has over our government. If he's lazy, I mean, how much influence does he personally have on the decisions that are being made? We see in these campaigns around the country that it's Bill Clinton who's going around and campaigning for these Democratic candidates. And Bill Clinton is the one who helped elect the Democrat to fill John Murtha's seat in Pennsylvania. It's Bill Clinton who's going out to Nevada to try to save Harry Reid's seat. And Obama is not doing much to help these candidates, and maybe any help he gives would be counterproductive. He did come to New Jersey to try to re-elect John Corzine, and the opposite happened. Okay, he came in, and then Corzine got crushed in a very Democratic state by a Republican candidate. So the Clintons are still there, and I'm not sure how much influence Obama himself personally has. We're dealing with a liberal mindset, and that's what I think we need to take on these issues, particularly on global warming. I might also add that the media, of course, is very biased, and we see it in their reporting, and they're covering up for Obama's failures and his gaffes and his use of the teleprompter. Even at press conferences, the media generally covers that up. Fox News has exposed some of that, but be leery of Fox News also. Fox News is a big supporter of John McCain. And at this conference, I've done a little sampling, and every single person I've asked at this conference has said that he prefers J.D. Hayworth to John McCain. And I'm not making an endorsement, and our organization wouldn't do that, but ask yourself why Fox News has John McCain almost every night and almost never has J.D. Hayworth on in a favorable light. So Fox News has its agenda too, and it wants to re-elect John McCain, and that's a tough primary. And of course, John McCain used to support global warming. We heard yesterday he had 2 bills where he pushed cap and trade and he pushed global warming bills. Well, do we want to re-elect someone who is a big supporter of global warming? I don't think so. But I'll leave that up to you. As the issue turns on this global warming matter, and as I think we've almost won it in the political realm, there are still 2 other realms that we need to win it in. And one is education, because we have not yet won it in the battleground of education. And I know Dr. Fred Singer courageously went up to Harvard and gave a presentation there. I can tell you that at Harvard, the global warming mindset still controls, still rules the roost, although Dr. Fred Singer certainly opened a crack in it and did a great job in refuting it. But we've got kindergarten students, elementary school students who come home and tell their parents that they're terrified of death by global warming. And we've got this documented. So the schools are still run by the global alarmists, and we have not won that battle yet. And then the other battle where we need to focus a great deal of our attention is the court system. Because we can win in the political realm, we can win in Congress, but that doesn't mean we've won in the courts. And in the courts is where there is much of the motivation for the lies and misinformation about global warming. The courts have the power to award billions of dollars to trial attorneys and others who support this global warming nonsense. And we talk about how Al Gore has made perhaps up to $100 million, which is an outrage, in what he's done in spreading misinformation about global warming, but that's just a drop in the bucket compared to what the courts can order here. And if you look at the example of asbestos, once the trial attorneys got on that issue of asbestos, they looted insurance companies, manufacturers, shipbuilders, anybody and everybody who had ever touched asbestos ended up having to pay tens of billions of dollars, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars when it's all added up, to much of which went to the pockets of trial attorneys, and then much of that then goes back into the political process in the way that they contribute to candidates and get their friends elected office. So that is the phase we're now in, is fighting global warming in the courts. Now in 2007, the Supreme Court first addressed this issue in Massachusetts versus EPA, where the EPA agency under President George W. Bush had said, we're not going to regulate CO2. We're just not going to do it. And ordinarily that would end the matter, but the state of Massachusetts sued, and they were supported by these environmental groups, and they wanted the court to tell the EPA to regulate CO2. That's almost never done, by the way. But the Supreme Court looked at it, and in that case, there were a number of amicus briefs filed, and what an amicus brief is it's a friend of the court brief. This is an increasingly important aspect of litigation, and something I encourage everyone in this room to think about participating in some level, because anybody or any group can seek to file a friend of the court or amicus brief in a pending action. And we don't do enough of it on our side, and the left figured this out decades ago, and they're pouring in these friend of the court briefs. And what that means is they're not a party in the litigation, but they're submitting a brief with information or arguments or suggestions to the court as an independent party, saying that we've looked at this issue and this is the way we feel the case should be decided. And in Massachusetts versus EPA, we lost the battle of the amicus briefs. There were 16 amicus briefs filed on the side of global warming. There were only 9 amicus briefs filed on our side against the EPA regulating CO2. And this has an impact on the court. And even Justice Scalia, in a book that he wrote recently, he said amicus briefs are becoming increasingly important. The justices will cite them at oral argument. The parties are expected to be aware of what is said in all the amicus briefs. They go out on the internet. Reporters pick them up. Reporters will quote from amicus briefs when talking about the case. And so for an effort that has a cost of maybe $5,000 or $10,000, maybe you can get someone to write it for you for free. You have an impact with the justices. You have an impact with the parties and their attorneys. You have an impact with the press. And you have something you can put up on the internet that can be used for years into the future as a resource for students, for academics, for other attorneys, and so on. It's one of the most efficient types of advocacy that's possible, and it's something our side needs to do more of, and we have to do more of it if we're going to win on this global warming issue in the courts. You can go to the Supreme Court docket on the internet by going to your browser and typing in Google or Yahoo or whatever search engine you use, type in quotes, Supreme Court, space docket, D-O-C-K-E-T. You'll pull up the Supreme Court website. You can then type in any case number, and the case number for Massachusetts versus EPA was 05-1120. I'll read that again. The case number for that case was 05-1120, and that will pull up the docket before the Supreme Court in that important case, and it will show you who did the filings and who filed the amicus briefs, and you'll see there are more on the other side than there are on our side. When we have more amicus briefs, we tend to win statistically. I'm not saying it's guaranteed. The court's obviously doing more than just counting the amicus briefs on each side, but it does sort of tilt the playing field, right? It's a signal. It's a signal to the court that, hey, there are a lot of people out here who, in this situation, who think global warming is nonsensical. It's politicized. Perhaps it's even a fraud, and so on. All the stuff we heard yesterday, all the great work that people have done, that needs to be put before the court. The justices need to see that, because the justices are not going to to read the internet or cite a newspaper in their decision. They're not going to be watching Fox News and decide their case based on what's on Fox News. They're going to decide it based on what's before them. So all the good material we have at this conference, we need to get it before the justices. Well, a case has arisen in the Fifth Circuit, which sits over Louisiana. And it is the biggest case of the year on the global warming issue. And I'll describe the background of this case, and then I'll tell you how I did file an amicus brief in this case for precisely the reasons I just described. In this case, trial attorneys sued on behalf of a class of people, a class action. Now, class action is a type of case where an attorney comes into court and he tries to represent everybody out there who fits a certain description. And the reason attorneys do that is because then any damages will be given based on the huge number of people in the class, and then the attorney takes his cut from that damage award, and that can be tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. If an attorney just goes in on behalf of one client, then the attorney's cut can only be, at most, a contingency fee of that particular client. If he goes in on behalf of a class of 1 million people, the attorney's cut is 1 million times bigger. And these trial attorneys went on behalf of the class of property owners who suffered damage as a result of Hurricane Katrina. Big hurricane, lots of damage, right? How much damage from Hurricane Katrina? Probably $100 million, maybe more. No, $100 billion, maybe more. I mean, billions of dollars, I think, were damaged in Hurricane Katrina. And what the trial attorneys alleged was that a series of defendants, which included numerous prominent corporations in the oil and chemical industry, it's a who's who listing of oil companies, and that all these defendants intentionally and unreasonably used their property so as to produce massive amounts of greenhouse gases and thereby injure both plaintiffs and the general public by contributing to global warming. I'm quoting from the court here. And the global warming, in turn, caused the sea level rise and added to the ferocity of Hurricane Katrina. The combined effects of which resulted in the destruction of plaintiffs' private property, as well as their loss of use of certain public property in the vicinity of their dwellings. So there it is. Seeking billions of dollars on the theory that the oil companies and chemical companies and anybody else who has a smokestack in theory, they had, I think, dozens of named defendants in the case, contributed to global warming. This supposedly added to the ferocity of the hurricane. The hurricane then damaged their property and interfered with their use of public property, and therefore give us billions of dollars. That's the case. Well, the court took it seriously. And although the trial judge dismissed it and went up on appeal, and a 3-judge panel for the Fifth Circuit said, you have a cause of action here. You've got a viable lawsuit. Proceed. Take discovery. Do what you have to do. Perhaps get to a jury. See what a jury will hold in this case. And there you have it. All our industries are on the hook. All our smokestack industries are on the hook for billions of dollars to these trial attorneys and their class of plaintiffs. Redistribution of wealth. Yep, that's what I heard somebody say. Yep. Then the Fifth Circuit got a petition for rehearing en banc. And that means all the judges decided, hey, let's take another look at this thing. Let's look at what this 3-judge panel did in this case, and let's reconsider. So the entire Fifth Circuit of Justices, which sits over Louisiana, also sits over Texas and Mississippi, agreed to rehear the case. And that action vacated the panel decision and required a new hearing. At that point, I figured we got to get in there with some amicus briefs here. We've got to get this great material that we have at this conference and we've had the past couple of years. Of course, this group's been the leader, really, in exposing the lies of global warming. And so we've got to get this before the court. I mean, the justices obviously don't go to our conferences. They don't spend time reading scientific journals. They're expected to decide the case on what's presented to them in court, and we can present stuff to the court. Even though we're not a party in the case, we can present it as a friend of the court because we're affected by the decision. We have some information that's useful to the justices, the judges in this case, in rendering their decision. And so I began working on an amicus brief. And I compiled a lot of the good work that's been done by many of the individuals in this room. Arthur Robinson's tremendous paper that he co-wrote with some of his children that appeared in the AAPS journal. I had a lot of that information. I had the graphs. Dr. Fred Singer, I had much of his great work. Willie Soon. I put all this into the brief, and I had to make some legal arguments to go around them, and I want to tell you a little bit about the legal arguments I made as to why the court should throw this case out and no court should entertain this type of redistribution of wealth. Yes? Of course, the questions about the petition project that Arthur Robinson started long ago, and it was very impressive politically. I did not go into that. I did have some statistics about how many scientists there are who reject global warming. So I did have some of the statistics. A court is generally not swayed, not supposed to be swayed by how many names are put on a petition. That's more of a political exercise for the congressman. But I did cite that there's a growing number of scientists who reject global warming. The legal arguments that I came up with, which no one else was making, and here, by the way, here's another example of how corporations are not doing the job that they really should be doing. The defendants in this case, quite candidly, did not make as effective arguments as I felt they should have made. Now, you would think that Shell Oil and all these other big oil companies would be out there with their vast resources making the very best arguments. Well, they're not. And we've seen some reasons in presentations during the conference why they're not. Some of them may stand to make from global warming legislation, right? Some of them have interests in windmills. Some of them may want to trade some of these pollution credits and so on. But the bigger reason, which others have not mentioned, is these corporations are run by people who are, by and large, liberals. Okay? Either they're liberal Democrats or they're liberal Republicans. Now, I can't name a single conservative who runs a big corporation. The only one I can think of is the guy who runs Federal Express. He has affiliated himself with Cato, I think, which is more of a libertarian organization. That's fine. He's the only one I can think of. Murdoch, I would not call Murdoch a conservative. I wouldn't. And as I said, Fox News is 100% behind John McCain. 100%. To the point where J.D. Hayworth's campaign manager says J.D. cannot get on Fox. They won't let him on. So I would not call Murdoch a conservative. Yes? I have heard that he's a conservative. I have heard that. That's based in St. Louis. I have heard he's a conservative. I couldn't name who he is, though, and I haven't seen him in any conferences. You know, I don't think he's here. If you're CEO of Enterprise Rent-A-Car, stand up. I don't think he's here.
John Mackey, Whole Foods.
Whole Foods?
Yeah.
Whole Foods was conservative on the health care issue. They were conservative on that issue. I don't know about other issues. Cap and trade? You sure he's conservative on cap and trade? I don't know.
I guess knowing his philosophy.
It would be? Okay. Could be. Okay, so there may be a few, but no one's named anyone in The oil industry, Coke industry, someone named, yeah, he's kind of a well-known conservative. But Wayne Resorts? Wind Resorts? Steve Wynn? He's, yeah, out there in Las Vegas. Yeah, well, that's, yeah. That's a particular type of free market, gambling. He's obviously in the gambling industry. I don't think he's a social conservative. Could be wrong. I mean, I can't vouch for you. I can tell you, every one of these names, I've never seen them at a conservative conference. I don't think any of them have spent any campaign money in favor of conservative candidates. I don't think there's been any prominent expenditure in favor of conservative candidates. I mean, we'll see. Steve Wynn, you think he's going to be out there spending money electing Sharon Angle in Nevada? We'll see. I don't think so. Some of them are sort of free market types. Steve Wynn's probably a free market type because he's in the gambling industry, so he may be kind of anti-regulation, which is good. And the cap and trade, I can't think of anybody who's really spoken. Steve Wynn, all these corporations can spend money now. They can spend money. So the excuse that, well, we're corporations, we can't get involved, that's not true anymore. They can be out there buying ads right now, criticizing cap and trade legislation, criticizing candidates who supported cap and trade litigation. Steve Wynn could be out there taking out TV ads today against Harry Reid in Nevada. He could be doing that. And he's obviously got the money to do it. He's not doing it for lack of money. But I don't think he is. So we got our work cut out for ourselves. We need to expose some of these people who are sort of pretending to be conservatives, pretending to be on our side, and they're really not for whatever reason. So we need to apply some pressure. If one of us works for a corporation is about to be affected by some litigation, by some legislation, we should let the people know in the marketing department, public relations department, hey, why aren't we speaking out for our interests here? The interests of our shareholders, the interests for our consumers. So we can create some noise to perhaps get some better performance by these people. Walmart is probably the best corporation in terms of speaking out for their interests, but that's just on the union issue. Walmart will fight the unions. So they will speak out on that issue. And that's why Blanche Lincoln, who's from Arkansas, was nervous and afraid to support card check. That's Walmart's home state, and card check is the big union legislation, and she wouldn't support it because I think she was nervous about Walmart taking out ads against her and telling their people to vote against her if she supported the pro-union card check. Well, the unions tried to defeat her in the primary, Democratic primary. They weren't able to do so. But that's one of the rare examples. And as I say, the oil industry, the chemical industry, they're not doing it. They're not stepping up to the plate yet, and we need to expose that, perhaps. So I spent a lot of time working on this brief, and the arguments I came up with, which defendants were not making, the oil industry was not making these arguments, is number one, the claims of the global alarmists many of their claims are difficult or impossible to test and cannot be falsified to a certain extent. Now, we feel we can disprove some of them, but some of their allegations are not falsifiable. And the concept of falsifiability is sort of a philosophical concept, but it is one that's used by courts of law to decide whether expert testimony is admissible or not. And if someone makes a claim that is not falsifiable, then it should not be admitted into court under the Daubert standard for expert testimony. Now let's talk about this issue of falsifiability. A claim is not falsifiable when it could be false, but there's no way to show that it's false. And an example used by a court in excluding expert testimony was a clairvoyant's statement that he receives messages from dead relatives. You can't let that be repeated in court because that could be false, but there's no way to show that it's false. is someone came in here and said, last night, I got these messages from all these dead people. We couldn't prove that person wrong because we can't bring in the dead people to say, no, I didn't talk to that person, right? So if they tried to make that statement in court, we would object and say, don't allow that statement made before the judge or before the jury. That's not falsifiable. Therefore, it does not satisfy the Daubert standard for expert testimony. And you'll see some of the claims by these global alarmists are not falsifiable. Okay, what was one we heard yesterday? That Chicago, the first 30 floors of the Sears Tower is going to be under seawater. And by the way, why would that be seawater? I thought Lake Michigan was freshwater. All right, he says, look, if we don't do something, the first 30 floors of Sears Tower is going to be underwater. That should never be allowed in court because that could be false, probably is false, but we can't prove it false because we can't predict the future. I mean, we can't bring in evidence of 10 years in the future. We can't bring in pictures. Here's Sears Tower 10 years in the future and it's not under seawater, right? We can't do that. So that's not a falsifiable claim. Therefore, it should not be allowed in court. And here's the linchpin of my argument. Much of the global alarmist claims are not falsifiable, therefore cannot be supported by expert testimony. Therefore, the claims should not be allowed in the first place. Just throw them out now. Because you cannot bring in an expert to prove these claims, therefore just reject them now. Okay, it'd be like somebody suing to say, I'm being harassed by a dead relative. Okay, someone comes to court, I'm being harassed by dead. Just throw that thing out now. Because you can't bring in the dead relative to disprove it. You can't bring in an expert who can give admissible testimony about what the dead relative is doing. So you just reject it right now. You had a question, sir.
Maybe this is a sideline, but not on these particular specific types of suits, but on anti-global warming, the position generally, rather than attack the science itself, I think there are claims that it can be proven that certain claims that the researchers with the data did,
right,
they may be provably false,
right,
and that provide a basis for a civil suit the other way.
Well, if possible, yeah. Certainly some of their claims can be proven false. And maybe there should be, maybe we should go on the offensive.
That's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent suggestion. And they should be held accountable for any fraudulent claims that they make. Absolutely. And the Attorney General for the state of Virginia is trying to do that. He has sued the University of Virginia to get emails to see if there's any misconduct there in the fabrication of some of these claims, which use government money. And perhaps other people who are injured by this hucksterism of global warming has a cause of action to sue some of the people who are committing fraud. Maybe Al Gore. Maybe he has hurt people in some way while he's pocketing up to $100 million. I mean, somebody maybe lost up to $100 million because of his hucksterism, and maybe he's accountable for that. Okay, if the court were to accept that, that would close the door on a lot of the global warming alarmism. They can't get they can hire experts because they got the money to do it. So they can hire all these university professors, but the point is what the experts have to say should never be admitted in a court of law because it doesn't pass the test of testability and falsifiability. All right, that was my first argument. My second argument is that the claims are non-justiciable. And that's a niche in the law that says there are certain types of claims that just are not suitable to resolution in a court of law. And people in this case, the oil industries, did make the argument that these claims are not non-justiciable because it should be decided in Congress, that they're political. and the Congress should be the one that decides it. Well, that's kind of an obvious argument. I'm okay with it. That's fine. I'm not opposed to it. But I took it one step further, and I said they're non-justiciable because the science has been so badly corrupted that there's no way a court of law can sort through and separate the fact from fiction because there is so much corruption in the science, you just can't believe it. Okay, the science of the global warming alarmists have discredited themselves. And for that, I cited ClimateGate that shows these emails, these shocking emails. And I encourage you all to read many of these emails and read the reports about them. Here is a quote, an email from Professor Phil Jones. Quote, I've just completed Mike's, I think that refers to Mike Mann. I've just completed Mike's nature trick of adding in the real temps to each series for the last 20 years, i.e. from 1981 onwards, and from 1961 for Keith's to hide the decline. This is an email that came out in ClimateGate from Professor Phil Jones. And it's one of many emails that were flying back and forth as these self-described scientists are preparing their reports, their claims, their statements, etc. And there's so much of this. How could a court of law possibly go through and try to undo this pattern of manipulation? And I argue that it's impossible. And it renders the whole thing non-justiciable in a court of law. And therefore, the court should throw it out. So that was my second argument. Further, I said that recent cooling trends disprove the claims of the global alarmists. Now, I get some flack for that because the global alarmists will say, well, maybe it's cooling now, but it's just going to heat up even more. It's going to come back with a bigger vengeance in a few years. Well, that's not what they said before. Okay, they said that there's a crisis that is so imminent, we got to act now, and that this requires immediate action. And if it's cooling now, then why don't we just wait and see what happens later? And if it starts to heat up, we can revisit the issue later. But there's no reason for taking emergency action now if we're in the middle of cooling trends. Okay, we can wait and see what happens later. Art Robinson had the very insightful statement that I put into my amicus brief, where he said words to the effect that while correlation does not prove causality, non-correlation does prove non-causality. Right? I mean, if the industry smokestacks are putting out a lot of pollution and the world is getting cooler, then that proves non-causality between the pollution and the cooling and the warming claims. And I've got many of the graphs that Art published in the AEPS journal, and I got many other graphs too. There's been a lot of anecdotal evidence the last couple of years about record cold temperatures, snowfall in Pennsylvania in October, I think it was. And then for the Fifth Circuit, which is located in the South, it pointed out that in Houston, there were 2 instances of snowfall last winter, which is extraordinary for Houston. And these anecdotes suggest that maybe there is not causality. Okay. Then my third set of arguments, which I have not seen others make. We saw a little bit of it in the presentations yesterday, but it is that energy is a life-enhancing activity. And what I did was I looked at the average lifespan for different countries around the world and found that the lifespan for different nations is roughly correlated to their energy use. the more they use energy, the longer they live. And the country that has the longest lifespan, Japan, big consumer of energy, Singapore, Australia, Canada, France, Sweden, Switzerland, Israel, these are all big consumers of energy, and they have the longer lifespan. Sometimes people get fooled, why isn't the United States, why don't we have the longest lifespan? And it's been pointed out that we would have the longest lifespan if the statisticians separated out the premature deaths that result from accidents and crime. Then it's only when you include the non-health fatalities that the United States drops a bit in the lifespan. But what's common about all these countries is they have tremendous energy use. And so if you limit energy use, what you're really doing is you're limiting lifespan. And maybe that's what this is all about. We've heard talk about the financial motives. They're certainly there. We've heard talk about the motive of greater government control. That's certainly there. But what we haven't heard perhaps enough discussion of is the anti-life element in society. And the word anti-life, by the way, goes back to the 1920s. That transcends contemporary politics, that there is an anti-life element in society that for whatever reasons there's an ideology that is opposed to life. And that may explain a lot of the general rank and file liberal support for limiting energy use, because when you limit energy use, you're limiting life. You're curtailing lifespan. It's that simple. And it's pronounced, of course, in the poorer countries. If you look at countries that suffer from inadequate energy use, countries in Africa, Angola, Zambia, if you look at India, where there's not enough energy, their lifespan is much shorter than in the Western countries that have tremendous energy use. And there may be an anti-life element in this country that doesn't want to extend the life of people in these other nations. It's the same explanation as why DDT is banned in Africa. It's banned, and virtually everyone admits that if DDT were allowed in Africa, you could wipe out malaria and you would save perhaps 1 million lives a year, and yet that isn't done. There are people who oppose allowing that, and it's difficult trying to find an explanation for that, and I submit the explanation is there is an anti-life ideology, and that ideology is opposed to saving lives in Africa. And that same anti-life ideology, I submit, is opposed to greater energy production and use in Africa and India and all countries, because energy is so closely related to lifespan and comfort and productivity. Yeah. Well, yeah, and maybe there's an anti-life element in that too, to ration medical care. Maybe that's driving that, right? The ration medical care, denying medical care. Some people who enjoy that kind of power denying medical care, right? Okay, and then the final argument, I'll open it up for further questions from the floor. Because energy is so helpful to so many people and is so life-enhancing, how could anyone ever calculate the damages that is owed to someone due to global warming? It's indeterminable. The people who lost some property in Hurricane Katrina, even if, and of course we reject this, but even if their property loss was caused by the smokestack industries, what about the benefit that those property owners have enjoyed from energy use? Their benefits would far outweigh any harm from global warming. Their benefits include a longer life. They've lived decades longer in the United States than they would have lived in India for some of the African countries because of our greater energy production and use here. So if they're going to come into court seeking damages, any property damage has to be offset by the benefit of that same energy use. And the benefit is far greater than their loss. So they should take nothing. Their net damage is less than zero. So they have no cause of action, so their claims should be rejected for lack of damages. I submitted this, and I'll quickly tell you what happened. The plaintiffs sued so many people that the judges on the Fifth Circuit realized that each of them, many of them, had connections to some of the industries that were being sued. They may have owned stock in Shell Oil, their spouse may have owned stock, their son may work for one of these, their daughter may work for a company. And as each one revisited their conflicts of interest, as the case began to prepare for hearing by the entire Fifth Circuit, so many judges had to recuse themselves for a conflict of interest with one of the defendants that they no longer had a quorum to hear the case. Whereupon the folks on the side of the global alarmists said, therefore, the panel decision, which said the case should go forward, that should stand because there's no quorum to replace that. But by this point, the remaining judges on the Fifth Circuit looked at it and they said, well, fine, we don't have a quorum, but we already vacated that panel decision. Therefore, you're out of luck. This case is gone. You lose. Okay, let's take questions from the floor. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I just had three thoughts, but I guess the case is over now, so maybe it doesn't matter that much. But just three
There will
quick
be
comments.
no, it matters.
Huh?
There will
Okay.
be more cases.
Okay, just three quick comments. On the lifespan issue, I'm not an expert on this, but I know that I've read somewhere a while back, I don't remember the details, that a significant third factor in it is the way we handle premature deaths of babies, because we consider it to be viable, like if they survive 24 hours, many countries, a child that dies within a year of birth isn't even counted in the statistics, and I would imagine a very young death has a big impact on the average. So that's something possibly to look into. Secondly, I was thinking, if there are going to be more cases like this, I was just imagining that you could complain, you could do discovery. You want to know how much CO2 the class of defendants has been exhaling, and then if they try to say that's frivolous because it's such a tiny thing in comparison to what the oil companies have done, you can say, well, if that's the case, on that argument, we can say dismiss their emissions because they're very insignificant compared to CO2 evaporation from the sea.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's worth anything, but it might possibly. And finally, on the whole issue of life versus anti-life of energy, again, it's the basic idea that our necessities of life are material goods, and all material wealth is created merely by rearranging things. That's all you do. Whether it's molecules or mountains, you make something a object of material wealth. The production of material wealth can be reduced simply to rearranging things, no exceptions. And to rearrange things by the laws of physics means to move them around requires energy. That's work.
Yeah.
Force times an object, move it from it requires work, which is energy.
Right.
So energy is required. So therefore, it is a necessary thing even for our necessity. So as well as everything.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
Which explains your correlation of lifespan, or the somewhat correlation with energy and lifespan in countries, possibly.
Those are superb comments. Thank you.
Your anti-life point is great, and you realize that the leading anti-life figure in the world is John Holdren, Ehrlich protege, who's Obama's chief science advisor, and who wrote a few years back It has been concluded that compulsory population control laws, even including laws requiring compulsory abortion, could be sustained under the existing Constitution if the population crisis became sufficiently severe. And he's just got all kinds of crazed, lunatic statements. I don't think there's ever been any such kook who's ever risen so high in the U.S. government. It's, and certainly an anti-life fanatic. But that's our chief science advisor.
That's an excellent point, George.
Well, I agree there are these people who are anti-life, but I don't think that's really the major factor. From my experience with the press, and some of this is in my book, it's the Stern Glasses, the Mancusos, the Alice Stewarts, all these people that I have known and worked with in the past who used to be my friends. They've gotten to the press and they've got the major share of the press. I can point that out with absolute evidence in my book. My Exhibit 3 is where Sternglass misused my name and I couldn't refute it right after 3 Mile Island. He's used my name as an expert. I'm an expert, he's a cook. Now, people don't know that. They think Jane Fonda is the only cause. She's a big cause, but there are many other causes that have been catered to by the press. And all these people that you say have risen to the top of the ladder in the industry, and everybody else in this country, except a few of us here, they have heard all this information from the press and the media and the TV cameras that turn the lights off on people who try to tell the truth.
Yeah.
That has to be understood.
Yeah.
Now, I've circulated among many liberals, people that you call in the group of liberals. I'm a liberal conservative. I'm a conservative liberal. I don't think there's any one type of person, really. I think we're dumbing down the issue if we talk about just liberals versus conservatives. We have to look at issues and discuss issues. There's a whole range of solutions to every issue. But anyhow, I want to tell you that I've lived with liberals all my life, and I have never heard anyone talk about reducing life. So I don't think that's a significant cause. A significant cause is all the people under retirement age today have read the newspapers, have listened to TV, and you can call them liberals, but I think they're just ignorant. It's ignorant, and they run to the sensations of these people. Just one thing. Besides the Exhibit 3 about Sternglass, I also have mentioned in here when I testified for Congress. I testified against Mancuso, who was good to me. But he misrepresented the data. He took an Alice Stewart. He fired our statistician after I left the project. He told Congress before I testified that I was a good co-investigator of his. And I sat there thinking, what's he going to think after he hears what I have to say? I mean, guess what? The TV camera lights came down. And everybody, not only I, but better experts than myself refuted him. I finally had to publish something in health physics, but how many people in this country have read health physics? But I have 25 references in my publication, and I discuss how the project was supposed to be analyzed because I was involved with it. So all of you people would never hear what I'm saying if you didn't have me here.
Yeah.
How many have heard what I've said?
Well, thank you.
How many have seen my publications? You see what I mean?
Well, that's very well put. Now, we do have the internet as an ally now. We need to get that stuff out on the internet. There's nobody controlling the internet yet. And then in these court cases, anybody can seek to submit amicus briefs. So we have access to these court cases. So we need to get some of your information into these court cases before the judges. Howard.
I'm Howard Long. Andy, how can we support your amicus with the Supreme Court that presents the science to help reverse its previous ruling that carbon dioxide is a pollutant?
The case is not yet before the Supreme Court, but we can anticipate that in a few years, one of these cases, maybe this case I talked about concerning Hurricane Katrina, will get up before the Supreme Court. And this time, we will win the battle of the amicus briefs. And I'll be in contact with this organization, a lot of you individually, as I was with this brief I just wrote, and we will build on that work. And next time, we'll be ready and we'll educate the court. We lost Massachusetts versus EPA by only a 5-4 margin. And there have been a number of changes in justices since then. And I'm optimistic the next time this issue goes up before the Supreme Court that we can win it with the help of many of the good people in this room. Thank you very much.